In my Las Vegas video, I mentioned that I have a lot to say about cigars, and I still do, but this doesn't seem like something that's worth scripting out really nicely, especially because it's something that's not good for you. So instead of a fully scripted out, generous video, here is a simulation of enjoying a cigar together while I hit these bullet points about cigar enjoyment on my phone. Also, I've got to set this timer to remind me when my camera is about to turn itself off. And in the meantime, I'll get this one lit. I think the first thing that is to be said about enjoying a cigar is that it's a good idea to have a meal first. You definitely don't want to be smoking on an empty stomach. And something that's also worth saying is that you should have a drink poured for yourself. A lot of people really like bourbon. They like to get fancy with it. It's a very high-class activity, apparently. And so you pair that with a high-class beverage like bourbon in the same way that you would pair caviar with champagne. But for me, it'll just be a Coca-Cola most of the time, maybe even a Coke Zero. Nothing wrong with just a glass of ice water. The taste of tobacco is pretty similar to the taste of coffee in that you have this sort of bitterness and astringency and a sort of drying sensation. There's a terroir to the different tobaccos in the same way that there is a varietal nature to coffee. And so in the same way that coffee is made more palatable with syrups and sweet milk, I find that tobacco and Coca-Cola mix quite well together. I think at least a glass of water. You want something to drink no matter what. Eating beforehand and drinking while you enjoy a cigar is pretty non-negotiable, in my opinion. So I took some bullet points here. The first are regarding how to select what you're going to be smoking. Understand that you're going in blind. I don't think that you should ever expect to be like, oh, give me the blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, maybe that's just like a TikTok mindset where you're just like, these are the 5 things you should ask for whenever you go to a bar to seem like you know the place and you run the organization. But with your cigar buying experience, it's going to become apparent pretty early on that you don't know what you're doing, and that's fine. I think you should start with cigars that look light in color. That doesn't really tell you the whole story because that really only refers to the wrapper. It might be wrapped with something light and then filled with something very dark and aged. But you do what you can. Again, you're going in blind. If somebody was like, I want to try tequila, you wouldn't give them a añejo, especially if it costs $200 for a bottle. You want them to start light, and I think that's sort of similar with cigars. You also want to look at the shape and size. I'm sorry, I'm still trying to get this started while I talk about all this stuff. But you'll notice that this is pretty small. It's got the ring gauge is how you would refer to its width, its diameter. And you know, I know just based on looking at this, that this is only going to last maybe 30 to 45 minutes. And that's good for a video like this because otherwise I'd be chiefing on this thing for like an hour and a half. I think an hour and a half is a pretty average run time for a cigar. Don't feel like you have to go too big on the price. $6 to $9 is a good price range. That's pretty similar for a cheap bottle of wine. The difference is that you'll enjoy one of these on your own instead of sharing it between 4 glasses with a couple of friends. But similar to wine, $15 is that sort of sweet spot friction point where things start to change pretty significantly. And then anything too high above that is kind of diminishing returns territory. I think a lot of people write off, a lot of people who are mega bigly into cigars write off infusions and infused cigars. Acid Blondie is the most popular, I think. It's infused, meaning it's got flavors infused into it. And, you know, the fancy people, the experts, they tend to wrinkle their noses at infusions, but Drew Estate makes some called Java that are infused with the flavor of coffee. I think that's a reasonable place to start. It's a cigar that tastes like coffee, and some of them are a little sweet on the wrapper too, so it's kind of like, you know, kind of a good place to start. This one, by the way, is the Arturo Fuente short story Hemingway. I like the way that it is very small, it's short, it's got a pretty agreeable flavor to it. But after you buy it, you'll realize that you have to come to a decision in terms of how to cut it. There's a straight cut, a punch, a V cut. Then you could do a V cut and then rotate it 90 degrees and then do an X cut. Honestly, if you're going for like a first time, or you're going with a group of people and you kind of don't feel emasculated or made to feel small, just have the guy who's working at the front cut it for you if you're going to enjoy it that moment. There's really nothing wrong with that. Their cutter is going to be better than the one that you have, if you even have one, or any cheap cutter that you buy just for that. But if you are going to buy a cutter, I'd say just start with a V cutter. It's got a nice little shape to it. It kind of, depending on the gauge size, doesn't really let you cut too much off. Really, the only thing that you have to be aware of whenever you're cutting, especially if you're doing a flat cut, is that there's a sort of cap in the wrapper, and it's sort of like when you regrip a tennis racket and it goes over onto itself. You kind of establish that cap at the beginning, or in this case, the end. They put the cap on at the end. You don't want to cut that entire cap off, or this entire thing might unravel. And so there's little heuristics you can do, like looking at the shoulder and not cutting below the shoulder, but just try to examine it. If you're dead set on a flat cut, that is, a straight cut, then you got to kind of examine it and make sure that you don't take too much off so that you leave that cap intact. But otherwise, with the V cut, you can kind of really get in there, and some of that cap will remain intact pretty much no matter what, unless you really get in there, which is only possible with thinner cigars. The next problem that you run into is how to light it. There's no rules to this, but there are schools of thought. There are people who kind of want to toast it really lightly from far away, get complete coverage of the tip. That way you can enjoy the sort of virgin puff without tasting any tobacco until it's time for you to try it. There's people who just torch it, go crazy, and just... You've seen that in movies probably. I used to use this gigantic Burns-O-Matic torch with a big 32-ounce propane tank, maybe butane, and just torch that thing. I'm not going to tell you how to enjoy it, but if you have the patience and you have a little lighter with this thing for what are these things called? Not a jet. You know, like these sort of like jet fuel looking lighters. Keep it far away enough. If you ask me, if you're going to ask how I do it, it's keeping it far away enough where that you're not touching the flame to the actual stick. You're just kind of making it turn red, getting total coverage until it turns ashy and white, making circular motions, just getting full coverage. There is a sort of skill technically to enjoying a cigar, and part of that is an even burn. So if you just lit it all on one side, it's not going to burn evenly. The flavor is not going to express itself in the way that the manufacturer intended. And when I say manufacturer, like a real nice cigar is made by hand. So obviously, I like it. All of my dishware is now handmade. I am a little freak for handmade stuff. I love enjoying a little artisanal thing, and so that's part of why I like it. You don't inhale it. I think that a lot of times when I explain or talk about how I like cigars, and mention the fact that you don't inhale it, it's natural to leave you saying, well, what's the point? I think that's kind of a drug-centric mindset. I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't come off judgmental, but it's like coffee gives you energy, alcohol gets you drunk, cannabis indica makes you sleepy. But the point is that you like it, you enjoy it. It's like, what is the point of going out and throwing a frisbee back and forth? You enjoy it, you have a nice time, and you might have somebody to do it with, and that is a fun little ritual to do together. But also there's 100% a physiological effect. Tobacco is a stimulant. I have smoked one of these way too close to bedtime, and it's ruined my sleep for the night. It might give you a little bit of a head rush. There is definitely a physiological effect. I hope that you don't go into cigar smoking hoping to achieve that effect as the main goal. You'll notice that I've had to take certain breaks in the narration this evening to puff. And that's, I think, a pretty common question, which is how often to puff. If you just chief on this thing, it's going to get really hot. That's going to affect the flavor. It's going to start to feel really hot in your mouth. And then if you puff on it too infrequently, it'll just go out. So somewhere within that very broad range of a sweet spot. Let's see here. What do I have here? Oh, if you're smoking with your friends, just enjoy each other's presence. If you're smoking alone, look out into the distance and let your mind wander. But if you're smoking to learn specifically what you like, open your notes pad or get a pen and write out a couple of words to describe the cigar. It doesn't have to be industry terms. It can just be whatever you want, however you want to describe it. There have been certain cigars at the beginning, there were certain cigars that tasted poopy to me. I don't know how else to describe it. And so some of these in my notes will just say, this one tasted poopy in the first third. Later on, I've come to identify those a little bit better, but it doesn't really matter what kind of words that you use. But as you enjoy it, kind of visually divide the cigar into thirds and write down your experience, like the first third, the second third, and the third third. Unlike most food or drink, the flavor of a cigar changes over time as the heat source gets closer to your mouth, as oils build up in the part where your mouth meets it. So thirds are a pretty common division to talk about the progression of a cigar's flavor. You'll notice that I've started fiddling with the band here. I know that that's a pretty common question, which is when to take the band off. Do I take it off beforehand, after? As the part that's lit gets closer to the band, that heat will naturally melt the glue in the band and it'll just come off almost on its own. So once it sort of loosens up, feel free to stick it on your finger, or if it's a really good one, I'll tuck it away in a back pocket or something to save so I remember, oh, I really liked that one. And by the way, in terms of storage, I know that you probably think, oh, I need a humidor, I need some kind of special cedar wood lined box. A Tupperware and a Boveda pack or two, really just one is fine. These are a huge advancement in humidor and cannabis curing technology. It maintains a very specific humidity level and just keeps the vessel that it's sitting in at that humidity level. So if you have a plastic Tupperware with an airtight seal and one Boveda pack, maybe 69%. They come in all sorts of different percentages because they sell it for people who want to cure cannabis or store coffee or store cigars. What do they call it? They call it a Tupper door, I think, on the old forums. That is really pretty much unbeatable, and it's got a sort of nice feature to it, which is I'll never have more than 10 cigars at a time because they don't fit in there, and that's good because I don't want to have too many of them. I think cigars get a reputation sort of like wine, where only fancy rich people know how to swirl it and enjoy it and describe it. Like I said before, there is a level to cigar enjoyment, but only in the same way that there is a level of skill to enjoying sushi. The benefit to gaining skill is that you know what to look for, what to ask for, and what to avoid doing in ways that'll hurt your experience. So like dipping sushi rice side down might soak up too much soy sauce. It'll make it a little too salty. It's sort of the same way of like torching your cigar instead of lighting it evenly. Like there is a skill to it, but it's not like, ooh, that man is very unskilled. There's also all sorts of like subjective measures of skill, like how evenly it burns and how long the ash is. Can you make it like really nice Marge Simpson hair of ash? And you know, people who care about that sort of stuff will like hold it always vertical so that the ash gets really long and things like that that you don't really have to worry about. I have a note in here, is it unhealthy? To be honest, I feel like anyone who says no to... Let me start over. When somebody asks, is smoking cigars unhealthy? Anyone who says no feels, to me, like they're either lying or coping. Yes, you don't inhale, but get close to anyone after a cigar and they'll smell it on you hours later. They will smell it on you, on your hair, on your clothes. It sticks to you. And so if the smoke can stick to your clothing all over your body, let's be real about how deeply it's penetrating into your mucous membrane. If you smoke it too fast and or on an empty stomach, you'll feel sick, you'll feel nauseous. You might throw up, you might get dizzy. By the way, that's another reason why I enjoy a Coca-Cola as my beverage, because people who get, oh, my timer's going off. Let me finish this thought. People who sort of get that sort of tobacco poisoning sensation, they'll put a sugar packet onto their tongue because it's like, oh, the sugar makes me feel better. So having a sweet drink, kind of a two-bird situation. Let me go press my camera's button. Anyway, I think where we left off is that sugar is the sort of classic first aid to overindulging in tobacco. That was coming from a place of like, if these weren't bad for you, there's no reason why it would make you feel bad. That's a gross oversimplification, but come on, let's be honest. These are bad for you. They're certainly not good for you, let's say that. So why do it, other than you enjoy the taste? The ritual, I like the ritual. It's sort of like hookah in that sense. You can't just dip out for a cigarette break, be on your phone the whole time, and go back to your regular life 10 minutes later. You have to commit to a big chunk of time. There's a level of setup to it. You're not going to be doing a whole lot of other stuff. In this case, I'm shooting a video at the same time, but normally I'd just be like staring off into the sunset. By the way, there are far healthier ways to achieve the ritual, the peace, the self-reflection, namely mindfulness meditation. So I don't want to make it seem like, oh, this will set you free and make you feel like a person at peace. No. But, you know, I like cigars at a casino in Las Vegas because it's a definitive, I'm staying right here for at least an hour decision. I can sit down at like electronic bubble craps and just be like, you know what? If a couple drinks come my way, I'm not steamed about it. But for the next 2 hours, it's just me and the stick. Also, there's a level of bonding to it. I don't think it's any secret that cigars are very popular in the male space, and I think that in the same way that men like me need disc golf as an excuse to go on a long walk with your homies, having a cigar is one mask-approved way of sitting next to a guy and chit-chatting for 2 hours without feeling zesty about it. Most of the time I'm enjoying one of these outside in my own backyard. A lounge is a very popular place to go, provided you can find a nice cigar lounge with good ventilation, a good environment. I went to one in LA that had a sign on the window that's like, if you talk about politics, we're kicking you out. We're committed to having a good environment here that's chill. I've also seen cigar lounges that host competitions. There's like a slow smoker competition where it's like, there's a bunch of made up arbitrary rules where it's like, oh, who can keep their cigar lit the longest without finishing it? It's goofy, it's silly for sure, but it also speaks to humanity's propensity to turn everything into a competition, even when the express purpose of the activity is just kind of like taking it easy and chilling out. What can you do? And I think really the most important part, if you're watching this and you're like, I want to try a cigar because the cool influencer showed it to me and now I want to try it, don't force yourself to like it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. And I feel bad because I've certainly wasted a lot of really good, fancy, expensive cigar experiences just being like, I'm a cool guy, look at me, I'm rich and I'm chiefing on a cigar. Because there's definitely a feeling of that where it's like, I get it now. I understand this. Oh, I just ashed all over my phone. Whoops. How's that for a cool guy moment? You know, there's a certain panache to enjoying a cigar that's pretty undeniable. But if you don't like the taste, what's the point? Don't force yourself to like it because it's like, oh, this is what cool people do. This is what rich people do. Fancy people. There are far better things to get into that are more beneficial to your well-being and your social life. I know that one final common question is, how do I know when to stop smoking the cigar? And I think if you just sort of take your fingers, this is also pretty subjective, but 3 fingers, if you say, all right, well, once it's come to about 3 fingers in length, it starts to taste kind of yucky to me. For me, it's more like a 2-finger scenario. Once it reaches that 2-finger mark, it's pretty much done for, in my opinion. I've heard people describe certain cigars that they really like as mustache burners because it's so good it makes you want to smoke it down to the point where it's burning your mustache. And even more unhinged, I've seen people, and this must be like a Great Depression mentality where nothing goes to waste, where they'll just like put the cigar out, take the tobacco out, and stick it in their mouth and dip it. Very vile stuff, in my opinion. Disgusting. But really, there's only 2 universally accepted party fouls in cigar world, and one of those is like stamping this out aggressively, like you would a cigarette, where you just put it out. It makes a bunch of ash, it makes a bunch of foul smoke that's going to kind of ruin it for anybody who's nearby, if there's anybody nearby. Like stamping it out doesn't smell good. It kind of harshes the mellow. And then the other big party foul is just generally being a jerk. Like, if you fancy yourself a cigar aficionado and you see the guy next to you picked a acid blondie, and you're just like, you really like that sweet stuff, huh? Infused with flavor, sugar on the wrapper. Could never be me. Like, there's really no need for any of that. So putting it out, stamping it out early, and being a jerk are really the only 2 party fouls. I think I've pretty much covered everything there is to say about cigar enjoyment. In that original Las Vegas video, which I'll link, I came up with a pretty good list, in my opinion, of the top 10 choices for somebody who's not sure what to pick, and this is like their first choice. And one person DM'd me after seeing that and was like, I gotta be honest with you, bro. Those cigar recommendations, they were mid. And in my mind, I'm like, perfect. That's exactly what you want in a crowd pleaser list of recommendations. Like if somebody was like, hey, I really want to get into soda, which sodas should I try? I'm going to say Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, Fanta. And yeah, all of those are mid, but that's by design. I'm going to give you a list of things that are crowd pleasers, agreeable, and not too out there. But there's a wide world of options out there, and there's no need to try to jump in as soon as you start. I'm really enjoying a lot of the novelty ideas in the cigar world. For example, I don't know who does it, but there's a brand that every year for the Super Bowl, they make this football-shaped cigar, and they use different colored tobaccos for the wrapper to make it look like a football. It's got this oblong shape, and they only sell it to the state that is hosting the Super Bowl that year. And so I've been seeing a lot of them in Arizona because we had the Super Bowl most recently. That's pretty cool. That's kind of funny. We have a baby shower coming up in 2 days, and there is this hilarious, I don't want to say novelty cigar, but it's like the idea behind it is kind of a novelty, like it's tongue-in-cheek. It's called Dad Bod, and it's got a belly. Like the shape of it is not straight, it's got a belly built into it. And the band, instead of just being like a straight band, is in the shape of a necktie. So it's a little fat cigar that looks like it's wearing a necktie. And instead of coming in a box, it comes in a big can that looks like a tall boy. So it's very funny. Like, in terms of getting a cigar for the baby shower, that's a pretty funny choice, especially if it's like, I'm not going to be giving this to a bunch of cigar aficionados. How funny would it be to bring the Dad Bod tall boy can of cigars to celebrate a new fatherhood? You know what I mean? There's all sorts of toasted marshmallow flavored ones that I haven't tried, but it's like, you know, don't write off having fun with it. And at the same time, it's all pretty much just a matter of what you want to get out of it. Like, there are people who just want to have a big fat stogie and look like the kind of guy who might enjoy one of those mob boss style. And there's different cigars like Nub, which is in my box here. I've never tried a Nub. I feel like the brand just looks kind of unserious, especially with a name like Nub. But it's specifically like very fat, kind of short. Still has a nice 1.5 hour long smoke time, so it's not short, but it gives you that look of like, meh, see? There's Lanceros, which are like long and skinny. Obviously, something skinny is going to have more flavor of the wrapper in it because the ratio of wrapper to filler is higher. But these are things that you'll figure out as you take your notes and try 3 cigars per month and just try to find similarities in what you like and what you don't like. I've gone to a nice cigar place and said like, all right, here, I've tried 20 cigars and these 5 were my favorite. According to those similarities, what do you think I would like next? And then at the same time, I've looked at certain cigars where I've described them as poopy. And I've gone to halfwheel.com. That's a pretty reputable, if not the most reputable sort of forum and review destination for cigars. And it's like, okay, I noticed that all the cigars that I really hate the flavor of, they have this sort of characteristic that the pros are calling, for example, barnyard flavor. It's like, okay, well, now I know when I read a review for a cigar, that flavor I'm kind of trying to stay away from. And in that way, it's pretty similar to coffee. Like, I know when I read the bag of coffee, if anything on the tasting notes lists fruit, I'm out. Because I know that's going to be kind of high acidity, fruity, and I'd rather have malty, chocolate, roasted nuts type of flavors, not so much cherry and orange. Now I finally run out of things to say, and that's maybe the part where my enjoyment reaches its peak here. This is more of a typical cigar enjoying experience for me, in the sense that I haven't picked up my phone the whole time except for looking at the timer, looking out upon my vast property, my 30-acre, I can't even front, it's an Arizona backyard. It's got cinder block walls like everybody else. It's a good excuse to slow down, to be present and paying attention to what you're enjoying, and force yourself to slow down. And I like that. Now that this is reaching its end, I realize that I never actually told you how to put it out. I just told you how not to. And the truth is, if you just leave it on the ashtray or on a surface, a flat surface, it'll just go out on its own. So you don't have to do anything. I'll just put this down. It'll go out on its own. It's not going to make any particularly egregious fumes or anything like that. And with that, I think I've said everything that there is to say, in my opinion, about the cigar enjoying experience. I don't want to say I hope you try it for yourself, because it is tobacco. It does contain nicotine. It's an addictive, unhealthy thing. But if the only thing that's been holding you back is having somebody talk to you about how to enjoy it, I hope that this has helped.